I'm Paris with Paris Ashley Home, and today I'm going to show you how to upgrade your floating shelves. So let's get to it. While these shelves are great, I have a new aesthetic that I'm going for. So I'm going to be constructing 2-inch shelves out of birch plywood, and I'm going to show you how I do that. So we're going to get started. I used a 4x8 piece of plywood, a 1/2 inch thickness. I had Home Depot cut it down for me to 4 quarters, so 2 feet by 4 feet. Then I took it home, I used a pencil, and I draw a line around the top. The reason I do this is to ensure when I'm sanding that I do sand the entire surface. And I use a 220 grit. Since this is a hardwood veneer, that's all you will need for this. So before we start cutting, I want to go ahead and show you my cut plan. 1 is going to be the top of the shelf, 2 will be the face, 3 the bottom, 4 and 5 are the sides. I want to make it look as if it's one solid piece of wood, so having 4 and 5 coming off of the top will give it that wraparound effect. Alright, so I have my table saw set up, and we're going to set it to a 45-degree angle. I do like to keep my shields on for safety first. I can only keep one side on when I am doing a 45-degree angle, and we don't need our sled for this cut. I will be starting off with number 1 from our drawing, so I will measure out at 8 inches. Then I'll grab my speed square and I'll draw a longer line just so it's easier to line up on the table saw. Now we're going to align it on the actual table saw. I will get down at eye level, make sure it is aligned, and adjust my fence back and forth until I feel it is correct. And now we're ready to cut. I did adjust my fence to 7 9/16 to get that 8-inch cut on top with a 45-degree angle. I am cutting 3 shelves, so I will repeat the same cut on each board to ensure the exact same cuts on each shelf. Now I'll take each cut piece of plywood with the original plywood it was cut from and number them, so as I continue additional cuts, they all come from the same sheet. Alrighty, so we're on to the next step. We are going to get ready for the face. So now I need to cut the 45-degree angle on the large sheet of plywood to the opposite 45 degree. This will ensure that the face wraps around the top of the top board, making that corner shape. And when you line up your plywood, you want to make sure that you are cutting off as little veneer as possible to ensure that wraparound on the face of the wood grain. Now that the 45-degree angle is cut in the correct direction, we are going to measure 2 inches for the face. Next, we're going to align it on our table saw. Adjust your rip fence. Mine was at 1 9/16 to create that 2-inch cut. And again, I am creating 3 shelves, so I will cut all 3 of my faces at the same time to ensure the measurements are all the same. So we are cutting the angle again to the opposite 45 degree for the bottom piece of the shelf. Now that we have the correct 45-degree angle for our plywood, we are going to adjust our table saw back to 90 degrees and adjust our fence to 8 inches. I did grab the top of our shelves and check the measurement against the fence to make sure it was the exact same for the bottom piece. Then I cut all 3 bottom pieces of the shelves. Now all we have left are the end caps. I am cutting every piece end at a 45-degree angle. The reason I'm cutting all of them is to ensure that the grain continues to line up and flows from top to bottom. If I did not cut all of them the exact same way, the grain would not line up. After I had all of my edges cut at a 45-degree angle, I lined up all of my boards and drew a line across all the pieces to make sure the grain was aligned. Next, we just need to cut off the end caps. After I cut the 45-degree angle on the edges, I was starting to see a little bit of tear out, and since I didn't actually need that edge, it was okay. But for the actual end caps, I want to ensure that there is no tear out or splintering on my boards, so I will go ahead and tape them. I set up my fence to 3 inches for each end. I did raise my board on a block. The 45-degree angle going under the fence was slipping under, so it was not the exact measurement, and I wanted to be sure that I could have that straight parallel cut. Again, I repeated this exact cut on all the pieces to ensure the grain flow would continue around the shelf. And then I did put both end caps for the top and bottom to the side. And then at the end, after I cut all the pieces, I went back and decided which end cap looked best with the grain, and then decided which would end up being my actual top and actual bottom. For the end caps, we do need to adjust for that opposite 45-degree angle, so I did go back and forth with my fence, aligning it so that I could get that angle to be able to wrap around to make that square edge. Also making sure that it is the same width as the face of 2 inches. Congratulations! All your pieces are now cut, and you can see how the grain aligns around the face and the bottom and top of the shelf, as well as both sides. Next, I labeled all pieces, all top, bottom, face, and end caps to make sure that I knew which piece went with which shelf. Next, it's time to create the stability pieces for the center, so when you collapse the shelves together, they don't collapse on each other, they hold flat and level. So I will measure the center piece. You want to make sure it's exact as possible. If it is even a 1/16 of an inch too big, it will give you trouble when nailing the shelves together. So it is 1 inch, which would make sense having a 2-inch face and 1/2 inch side cut pieces. I have my table saw set up to 1 inch and I'm using my leftover pieces of plywood. I'm just going to rip out a bunch of these so I have extras to make all of the supports that I need. We have made it. It is time for assembly. So go ahead and grab your tape. I prefer clear tape. I could not find mine until right after I finished making these shelves, of course. Anyways, grab your tape. I prefer Gorilla Tape. It holds really well. This helps when you are folding the shelves together after you have added the glue. Repeat this on both sides, then go ahead and grab your support pieces and your glue. We are ready to assemble. I'll use 4 pieces, 2 on each end, 2 in the center. Do a little drop of glue. You do not need to screw this in. This is literally support for the inside of the shelf. At this point, you want to grab the glue and spread it in the cracks of the shelf, and then I will use my finger to spread it a little bit more just to make sure it has maximum adhesion for all of the crevices. After you finish spreading the glue, grab your 2 sides and put it together. Oh, look at that. And you can see the pieces on the inside. It keeps the shelf the correct width apart. Now flip it over and grab your pin nailer. You can also use a brad nailer. A pin nailer just has smaller holes. At this point, this is why clear tape would have been a better choice because I cannot see under the tape. When you are nailing, make sure you do it in a perpendicular direction, not a parallel direction. This will prevent the nails from shooting out the front. I like to do a couple of nails in the corners each. I'll peel back the other side as well, and you can see it did separate. This is why the tape is there to hold it from completely separating and falling apart. You can just squeeze it right back together, wipe the glue off, and you are ready to shoot a little nail in there to hold it together. At this point, you can rip the rest of the tape off and then just continue down the board. I shoot nails in about 2 to 3 inches apart down the entire bottom and top. I try not to put any in the face so that you won't see any of those holes after the fact. Once you're done with one side, flip it over carefully and repeat the process on the other side. When you are done, you can grab one of these nail punchers. A screwdriver will also work, and I like to rub it on the corner edges. This will close most of the gaps created from those mitered edges. If there are any remaining gaps, this is where I will add wood filler, and then I will eventually sand it, and then after you stain, you'll never see those gaps. And let's flip her on its side, and it's time to add the end cap. So I do like to verify that the grain does line up. Now we're going to add our wood glue, same as we did the other way. Place it on top of the cap, and then I do start with the pin nailer in the top edge to make sure that the edges do line up properly, and then I do both corners, and then I continue around the edges. Once you are done with that side, go ahead and flip it over and repeat the process with your second end cap, adding your wood glue, nailing in the edges, the front, the sides, and check it out. You just made yourself your first shelf. Congratulations. All right, let's finish up the other 2, and then we'll get to hanging this up on the wall. All right, all 3 shelves are made, so it is time to wood fill all of the tiny little pin nail holes and all of the edges. I tend to do a little more wood filler than necessary because I can always take it off, and then that saves me from having to do a second round. While they are drying, we are going to go ahead and make our cleats. So we are going to measure the inside space between the shelf gap. One shelf is a little bit bigger than the rest. They are all about an inch, so we will make the cleat just under an inch at 15/16 so that it is very stable when we slide on the cleats. All right, so you want to measure the width of the inside of your shelf. Say the inside of your shelf is 42 inches. You want to cut these down to 41 inches, and the thickness will be 15/16 since that gap is 1 inch, creating just a little bit of wiggle room for once you do hang these on the wall. And I will attach 4 of these little support pieces with my Kreg jig to add more stability. Next, I'm going to get my Kreg jig out. I'm going to put the piece in the center to create 1 pocket hole per each piece. We're going to drill a nice little drill in here, and then we're going to repeat that on all of the support pieces. Once all of your pocket holes are drilled, go ahead and add your screw, add a dollop of glue, attach your piece, and screw it in. We are going to do 4 of these. I put them not completely on the edges and not completely in the center so that they don't interfere with the support pieces on the inside of the shelf. Now all of my cleats are made, so let me show you how they will work. So when you have your cleat, it's going to get screwed into the wall this way, and then your shelf will simply slide on. I'm not going to shove it all the way on because it's kind of hard to get that thing out, but that is how it will work. So let's go ahead and get off all of this wood filler. I'm using my orbital sander first. I did end up having an oops shelf. This one right here was my tester, so I could figure out the pressure for this sander because this was a wood veneer plywood, and there were some edges where I went too deep, and I did kind of get rid of some of the veneer. So that's why I have my hand sander out. I am using a 220 grit. On the straight edges, I am using my orbital sander with minimal pressure, and on the corners, I am hand sanding it to make sure that I have complete control on the sanding. And once you are done sanding, we are going to go ahead and grab a tack cloth and wipe off all the dust. This tack cloth, it's kind of got a waxy feel and it grabs up all the dust and particles, and you'll be able to see any spots that you missed when you were sanding initially. And then again, go ahead and wipe those with the tack cloth. And can you believe it? We made it to staining. We are going to wood condition all of our boards, and we're going to wear a safety mask because this stuff is really, really stinky. I use a lint-free rag. I use gloves to protect my hands, and I do have a scrap piece of wood in the center right there that I'm going to test my stains on before I make any true commitments. Give your can a nice little swirl to make sure it is nice and mixed up, and then go ahead and start your conditioning. I will go ahead and do all of the boards knowing that I will be staining them, and it's best for the boards to sit for 30 minutes before staining to make sure that the wood conditioner does soak in. Also, wipe off any excess wood conditioner when you are done. Each set of stain took roughly 20 minutes, but I will say for the wood conditioner, this one does take the longest. It is the first. You want to make sure that you lather this up so that you prevent any splotches with the actual stain. After 30 minutes, it is safe to start staining. I start off by whitewashing my boards. This knocks out the yellowing in the wood. I'm using Antique White by Varathane. It is an oil-based stain. I prefer oil-based. Some people prefer water-based. It is strictly a personal preference. Neither is better than the other. So here you can see all the yellowing is out of my test piece. I will go ahead and whitewash the rest of my shelves in preparation for the final stages of staining. One of the key factors in staining these boards is to immediately wipe off the excess stain so it doesn't get goopy and splotchy when it is drying. So let's whitewash the rest of these. I like to wait until these are dry to the touch. You don't need to wait 30 minutes like wood conditioner, just dry to the touch is fine for the next round of stain. I'm using my test piece to test out my stain colors. On this side I am using a special walnut, and on the opposite side I am going to use early American. And I'm going to see which side matches my shelves in my bathroom better, but I also wanted to show you how beautiful these two stains are. So on the left we have Special Walnut, and on the right we have Early American. I am just such a fan of both of these colors. And it's no surprise to me, but it may be a surprise to you guys. I am going with my all-time favorite, Early American. This is my favorite stain combination: wood conditioner, whitewash, and Early American. It's a gorgeous, warm yet light stain. I did switch to a terry cloth to remove the excess stain. The lint-free rag was kind of making it streaky, and the terry cloth was just working a lot better. Once I am done with the stain, I go back. There are a few funky, shiny spots, so I did use my 220 sander and just lightly sanded those spots and immediately restained them, and it worked perfect. So if that happens to you, the key is to just lightly stain it while the stain is still wet, and then reapply a little bit of stain in that area. So it is the next day. I let these sit overnight. When I came back in the morning, I didn't love them. I wanted them a touch darker, so I went ahead and added another layer of Special Walnut. Instead of the Early American, Special Walnut is a touch lighter than Early American. And after adding this second layer of stain, I was absolutely in love, and this was it. This was going to be the stain that I go with. So just to repeat that, the combination that I used for this color was wood conditioner, Antique White, whitewash, Early American, and then a layer of Special Walnut. After this dries, I will go ahead and use a matte polyurethane to prevent any elements from damaging these shelves. So now that these shelves are dry, it is time to add our polyurethane. I go with the Minwax polyacrylic. I have used other polyurethanes before and they work just as fine, so I like this one just because the can is pretty. So I go ahead and give it a swirl. You want to swirl, not shake. That prevents bubbles. When you are applying the polyurethane to the shelves, I like to use a foam brush and I go in the direction of the grain. You want to go back and forth, making sure there are no bubbles. If there are any bubbles when the polyurethane is wet, they will dry as those exact bubbles. So again, you just want to make sure you go back and forth over and over and over again just to make sure that the layer is even and there are no bubbles, and your polyurethane will dry perfect. Once you are done polyurethaning and it is dry, you want to go with a 220 sandpaper, just a very light sanding over it. This will just help for the other layers of polyurethane adhere and to make sure that you have the max seal on your boards. When you have finished sanding all your boards, go ahead and grab your tack cloth and again wipe all of that dust off of your boards. We're going to polyurethane again. We're going to polyurethane 3 total times. We're going to poly once, we're going to sand once, we're going to poly twice, we're going to sand twice, we're going to poly a third time, and then you are done. Now that the shelves are finished, let's go inside. I'm going to use my stud finder and find the studs. You can see those white spots on the wall. Yes, I did have shelves up before, so I do know where my studs are. I'm just doing this for teaching purposes. You want to find your studs. The other 2 studs should be about 16 inches apart. Make sure you find those as well. I use my level. I mark vertical on the stud so I don't have to find the stud on all 3 shelves. After I mark the vertical marks on all 3 shelves, on all 3 studs, I'll go ahead and grab my ruler, my yardstick, and I will make my measurements at 13 inches apart to make sure that my shelves are nice and even on the wall. All right, so I went through each shelf and bracket and I labeled them top, middle, bottom, depending on imperfections. I have this one on top because it has this weird unperfect edge right here, and then I did the same for the next two on which show the nicest pieces, and my arrow is pointing towards the wall, so I make sure that this cleat fits this particular shelf perfect. So let's get these cleats on the wall. I'll be installing these with a 3-inch screw using a 9/64 drill bit. I marked the center of my board. I'm gonna hold it up and drill into here. Pull this away. Since I am using a 3-inch screw, I'm gonna drill even further. I will grab my screw. Squeeze it in, drill it in free right here until I see it poke through the other side, a little bit more. Perfect. Now I can line it up on this hole right there and screw this in. I'm going to drill my stud right here. While it's still level, I will come to the other side. I will tip the board down again to make sure I drill this all the way in. And repeat the same right here. Let's go ahead and make sure that this cleat is level before we get it screwed in fully to the wall. Now that we are sure, I like to do the outer screws first, and then I will come back and do the center screw. Let's repeat this process on the second cleat. Let's get our center screw in, make sure it is level. Then I will secure it with the outer screws. And lastly, get that center screw in and repeat the process on the third cleat. By now, I hope you should know what you're doing, so go ahead and get your third cleat in. If you are doing 3 shelves, if you aren't, then just keep watching because this is really fun for me. And I really do appreciate you being here. And now, what we have all been waiting for, let's slide on our brand new shelves onto our cleat. Here's number 1, and let's grab number 2, slide it on, and last but not least, let's grab number 3, slide it on, and you have 3 floating shelves. I do grab my level to make sure that they are all even on the sides, and next we are going to lock these shelves onto the cleats. But first, let's give myself a little clap on the back. Look how level all these shelves are. I'm really proud of this. So let's secure these shelves to their cleats. I'm going to use a countersink bit for my 1-inch screw so that the screw is inside of the wood, and then I will use a little bit of wood filler to hide that screw. I do use my ruler to make a mark at 3/8. 3/8 is half of 3/4 to make sure that it is in the center of that cleat. I will then get my countersink bit and drill a nice little hole at that spot. And then I will drive in my screw, and then I will grab my wood filler and I will fill in that tiny little hole. It's a personal preference if you want to add a little bit of stain after. I was planning on it and then I decided against it because, I don't know, maybe I was lazy. I did use a little baby wipe to wipe off any wood filler on the actual wood, so the wood filler was only in the hole and it hit it just fine. I repeated this on the other 2 shelves, 2 screws in each shelf. The middle and the bottom shelf I did in the bottom, and the top shelf I did in top. On top so that you wouldn't be able to see the screws inside with the wood filler. I also had plenty of decor, which is why I decided against staining the wood filler. And speaking of decor, let's go ahead and put it back on the shelves. Thanks for hanging with me. Congrats on finishing your very own floating shelves, and feel free to tag me when you do finish. I'd love to see your finished pieces. All right, so let's remember where we started. Here we are, and let's see the finished look. What do you think? If you're a fan, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. I appreciate you being here. And here's a sneak peek of my next tutorial. I'll be painting this window frame. Yay!